Welcome everyone. So thank you for joining this panel. It was hatched in some ways a long time ago in a conversation between myself and Matthew about the importance of the guilds. So professions that have a singular value in constituting civil society, and sometimes they have the characteristic of being governed by professional associations, and sometimes they are subject to a lot of public scrutiny, policy interference, regulation. Those are some of the things that make modern professions like medicine, architecture, law, education, journalism, socially and civic-wise significant. There was an interesting discussion earlier today about Catholic journalism. So in a sense, one of the guilds was discussed separately. And they talked about the idea that being a good Catholic journalist is really about being a good journalist. Now, if you're a Catholic shoemaker, you don't have to put crosses on all the shoes, make really good shoes. And there's a sense in which that's true, but in some ways, I'm speaking for myself here, but all the professions that we have represented on the panel today have in some ways been distorted by living memory. So when you think about a doctor or a healthcare provider, all too often, whether it's abortion or euthanasia, they're basically a certified death technician. How many lawyers today advance or even work from principles of natural law? And in architecture, the kind of beautiful churches of centuries past that people seek out, they fly to Europe just to visit them, are not echoed in contemporary architecture. In some, this doesn't have to be everyone's view, but in the time of the Pritzker process, there's a big difference between what ordinary people would draw as a house, what a child would draw as a house, what kind of architecture people would prefer if you give them pictures side by side, and what the profession gives us. So in these guilds, I think it's very interesting to talk about the Catholic profession as something perhaps distinctive from the profession as commonly practiced. So we have three very interesting representatives today. So to my right, I gotta get that first straight, is Natasha Cricken, who's a practicing architect. To my immediate left is Phil Horgan, who's active in law, and as you may have just heard from the previous panel, including law that pertains to Catholic civil rights and rights of conscience, but other things as well. And in terms of this certified death technician model versus the old Hippocratic tradition of not taking life. Jennifer Medall is actually active in engendering life wherever possible. She's active specifically in fertility care. So I think the thought would be that we would hear a few minutes from, if we divide it up, we have a few minutes from each person to start, and then probably questions and back and forth from everyone on the floor. So, did you want to start us off?
Sure. I myself am not a physician. I'm a registered nurse, so I have that association. But in the work that we do, it's actually a very unique area of healthcare because it's not at all mainstream. So we work with women who would like better healthcare, even. So as much as we do the fertility piece and we help couples restore fertility for natural conception rather than going the artificial technology route, we also work with women who have health issues whose doctors have told them the pill is the only option. You go on the pill or you deal with the consequences and suffer through whatever symptoms you have. And so I'm like I said, a nurse and a practitioner in a charting method that works very closely with this, the Creighton model. And we have our own association, but we work very closely with the doctors, but we have to protect our doctors. And I think that's a big part of the association piece, is that in a strange, twisted way, if the Catholic doctors, if the doctors kind of associations in the secular world find out that we have Catholic doctors that are providing life-giving care, that are doing non-artificial reproductive technologies and trying to restore and are not going to offer termination if there is a diagnosis in utero, if those doctors are found out, their practice is at risk. And so we actually find we have to, we don't actually tell people who our doctors are until they're in the system, because we have to protect them from the secular world. So I don't know if that's exactly kind of what we're looking for as a topic or questions, but I think I know that the doctors have the Doctors Guild, and there are kind of groups to support them in their conscience rights. But, it's been good to have these like-minded people. I'm very aware of how careful We have to be.
One thing that's adjacent to that, one of our panelists who at the last minute unfortunately couldn't make it today because of family commitment that came up, is Elisa Fernandez, who does trauma-centric therapy work, but is also a practicing Catholic. And it's a pretty immediately recognizable fact of our society that there's a bit of a mental and spiritual health epidemic. And so therapists of all kinds are in demand hand over fist, but how many of them understand the adjacency between, say, therapy and the sacraments, or therapy and the grounding power of faith? So that's another area somewhat adjacent just in terms of well-being, where the same issues are active. Phil, you were asked to weigh in at the previous panel, but between the Law Society in Ontario and the tendencies of the courts and the tendencies of Parliament, especially in recent years and decades, as we were just discussing, if you want to represent the basic liberties of the church and believers in Canadian society, the law is an interesting place to be now. Jurisprudence is an interesting.
Very good, Miles. But let me start first. My name's Phil Horgan. I'm married to Christine for 38 years. I've been practicing law for 39 years. I actually serve as president and general counsel of the Catholic Civil Rights League, which we've been doing court interventions on a variety of major social and or constitutional issues for the last 35 years. I'm also on the executive of the Thomas More Lawyers Guild, which is a Catholic lawyers association here in Toronto. There's other Thomas More guilds across Canada, across North America. I'm also involved on the regulatory side because lawyers are regulated by the Law Society, and got myself elected as a bencher of the Law Society in 2019 on a platform to push back against the DEI mandates that were being imposed on us as practitioners and as citizens, which we found to be completely inappropriate. And in fact, I was the mover of the motion to repeal what was called the Statement of Principles mandate that was in fact repealed after our election in 2019. And I think while those broad issues, civil liberties and so on, I could happily speak about or answer questions, I thought, Miles, my particular issue, and because I'm doing some cases in this area, is the lurch of our professional regulatory bodies to a progressive position, typically in support of DEI mandates, and its impact on me as a practitioner, let alone me as a person. So the Law Society had told me the story about the Statement of Principles. The Statement of Principles was mandated by the previous bench of regulators of the Law Society, one of which was that you were obliged to promote as a statement of principle of your practice DEI principles. Well, sorry, that doesn't work for me. I'm not interested in promoting something for which I have serious pause and or disagreement. So that got repealed during my time in office, but it hasn't stopped elsewhere. Think of psychologists. I know one in the room. Think of Jordan Peterson, who has been the subject of complaints not from his practice, not from even his other Canadians, but he's in effect been disciplined by the College of Psychologists. I'm acting for a teacher currently who has had her license revoked by the Ontario College of Teachers, which is that regulatory body. Why? Because she maintained a Facebook account, not in her name, in a fake name, in which she would provide opinions. She's actually a published author, but she would have opinions against the trans movement. She would have opinions against Black Lives Matter. She would have opinions against Islamic extremism. Well, that wasn't allowed. So when she took issue, during the COVID time, just give you the details of the case, they had Zoom meetings, like we all had to suffer through. But they would have a Zoom meeting with the supervisory staff of the school, principal, whomever, go through the issues of the day. And then the supervisory people would step out and it would turn into a union meeting because all the teachers who were there could talk about union issues. She raised her hand, the fake hand on the screen, and said, I have an issue that the board is pushing on us, this book called So You Want to Talk About Race, which was written by a Black author advocating, amongst other things, that there should be race-segregated classrooms. And she said, this is cultural Marxism writ large. It's not appropriate. It's certainly not appropriate in the Catholic school where she was teaching. Anyway, people were going, oh geez, what are we doing? What are we doing? But you can see people turning off their screens and so on. Anyway, point is, a couple of people, one or two in that room, may have known about her private Facebook account and said to a couple others, oh, you should see her Facebook account, where she's written about these things and written about them and quite extensive, and had comments from others, some of which are pretty rude. But the notion is she would talk about a lot of these views. No parent, no student was aware of it, wasn't brought up in the classroom, and she was a 20-year teacher. That led to a report to the equity lead at her high school. Imagine that, equity leads at Catholic high schools. Anyway, the point is, the equity lead then took it up the chain, led to an investigation, led to her suspension, led to her termination of employment. Her union disagreed that, and the grievance is still outstanding. But when that happened, the Ontario College of Teachers, oh, hang on, we have a problem with this. They brought the application investigation and then sought to have her license revoked. And if you don't have a license, you can't teach in a publicly funded education system in Ontario. Her union wouldn't fight on that point, saying you're better off just resigning, avoid the legal costs. And she came to me and I said, well, I'll take a run at it. And so I did, as per my private role as a lawyer. And we fought the case. She was nevertheless had her teacher's license revoked. We appealed, and the divisional court has now thrown out the hearing below on certain grounds, so we're going to have to do a rehearing because of the fact that they didn't comply with something called the Dore principles. I don't want to bore you with constitutional issues. But it's an example of a broader impulse within the regulatory field. Perhaps Natasha could speak about it. I know of a case currently where a professional engineer is being disciplined by the PEO, the Professional Engineers of Ontario, for maintaining certain views that are not illegal in public engagement, but their regulatory body doesn't appreciate. I'm always sensitive to this. You're a nurse. My daughter's a nurse. She's getting married next week. I'm so happy. Anyway, the point I'm making is that I'm very sensitive about all these things because it's the chilling effect, right? The educative impact of these things. The educative impact of the Jordan Peterson case. Who has the money like he does to run a $1 to $2 million legal defense, trying to take it all the way to the Supreme Court, which wouldn't hear it, in circumstances where you say that this whole thing is madness. I'm acting for this lady effectively pro bono. If she gets her job back at some point, maybe she'll throw me a few shekels to help pay for my bills. But the point I'm making is, we have an interesting role where we can, take on cases and try to help people. That's not an invitation to call me because I'll take on but I'm just letting you know that, I'm quite aware of the chilling effect. I mean, we intervened in the effective referral case, which was the mandate of the college, the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario. We took it all the way to the Court of Appeal. We did take it further, which is admitted to be a breach of the charter, but saved by Section 1 of the charter. So that doctors, nurses, other nurse practitioners are obliged to give an effective referral. They may not be obliged to do the abortion, but they have to give an effective referral to a patient who may come in seeking abortion. Well, even that, in my understanding of Catholic moral teaching, is cooperation with moral evil. What do you do? Even in the law, I make it clear, I've given seminars to Catholic lawyers about this, to say, now that we have euthanasia writ large, I've been using this power of attorney for personal care in the Catholic vein since the mid-90s when the original powers of attorney bills were brought forward. But I've been teaching lawyers, this is what you need to do. Here's a Catholic version of a power of attorney for personal care, no euthanasia, appropriate treatments for my condition, not to be denied nutrition or hydration, call a priest when I'm in extremis, and so on, right? The notion is the kinds of things that we would think are really an appropriate end-of-life care and treatment. But I run into that problem. Well, what happens if a client comes in, wants their wills done, typically we do the powers of attorney, and they say, well, Phil, I want to be given MAID, which I hate the term, it should be MAIK, medical assistance in killing. Whereas that Slovakian politician told us at the March for Life last week, we should call them the poison lobby. They're the poison lobby. They're the ones who want to poison you. Because poison has a more effective gravitas to it. Anyway, the point is, if I'm giving a power of attorney for personal care, I will not do it if the person wants made, if they can't recognize their family. Because I don't want to cooperate with moral evil. If I prepare a document that permits that, I've got problems. I won't do it. I could be disciplined by my law society for not serving a client with an available legal remedy, right? But I'm helping people to go through that. So I go through a bit of a process at the front end to say, by the way, if you want this kind of service, you'll have to go somewhere else. And I won't refer them. I said, there's plenty of lawyers, look it up, like there's a phone number you can use. But all I'm saying is that's kind of the pressure. Doctors, nurses, I don't know what Natasha's going to say about architects. I can tell you it's happening in the teaching profession. And if you don't think the Ontario College of Teachers is way out there in terms of how they expect, because you're in a privileged profession, that you're not allowed to have personal opinions and certainly not express them in a school setting. So the chilling effect of this regulatory engagement is of great concern to me, and it's happening now. And if you've got acquaintances or colleagues in that area, I'm building up more and more of these cases. I'm dealing with one in the Law Society currently, but I'm just saying this is not limited to particular, it's across the board. It's happening in a lot of different places. Sorry, Natasha.
Is it happening in architecture?
Is it happening in architecture? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Natasha H. Frican. The H is for Hernandez. I'm an architect. I was licensed, I believe, 10 years ago. I started practicing in 1991 as a student at the University of Waterloo, and I graduated in 97. So I have over 30 years of experience. And I was very frustrated in 2018 about the lack of, action on behalf of my profession to deal with social issues, So homelessness, housing issues, a lot of social issues we're seeing. And I thought, well, what are we doing? And even Indigenous truth and reconciliation. So I was elected, I put my name forward and was elected as a council member on the Ontario Association of Architects Board of Directors. So the association is an independent regulatory body. It serves to protect the public interest by overseeing the architectural profession in Ontario as mandated by the Architects Act. So we're governed by the Act, and our vision is an Ontario in which architects are valued contributors to society by creating a safe and healthy built environment that performs at the highest levels and elevates the human spirit. And so we have actually, I was on a education committee, and we did put forward some mandatory learning that was accepted and by the council. So we do have mandatory continuing education for sustainability issues. So all of our architects take a couple of hours of mandatory learning about green architecture or sustainable architecture. We had a mandatory EDI component. It was 1 hour mandatory because our let's look around. Who are we in this room? We represent multicultural people. So we want our spaces we want people to feel good in our spaces. And we did sponsor research on the impact of the built environment on long-term care and healthcare spaces. So that's something that we do. We take an active role in the profession's development in the province. I wanted to talk a little bit, I wanted to give you some quotes, actually. So here's some quotes. God created paper for the purpose of drawing architecture on it. Everything else is, at least for me, an abuse of paper. That was from Mies van der Rohe, the famous Mies van der Rohe, who designed and built some beautiful, the TD Center.
Would that include the Bible?
The purpose of architecture is to shelter and enhance man's life on earth and to fulfill his belief in the nobility of his existence. And that is from Eero Saarinen, the wonderful Finnish architect. And the wonderful Louis Kahn, who's a Jewish architect who I love very much and inspired me, and has created some incredibly beautiful buildings. The Bryn Mawr College is one of them, with incredible light entering sort of monastic spaces, very inspiring.
Did you do the Fort Worth Art Museum?
Yes, I believe so. Even a brick wants to be something. And a wall never knew how wonderful it was until the light fell on it. If you've ever stood against a brick wall after the sun has hit it and it's emitting sort of warmth on a cool day, you'll love that wall. And Louis Kahn. We have awards that we give out, and those awards are based not only on the beauty of the buildings, but also on the sustainability aspects. You can look at those on the Ontario Association of Architects website. There's some wonderful work being done by Indigenous architects. There's the Indigenous Peoples Spaces in Ottawa, which has a community kitchen on the ground floor. That was designed by David Fortin, architect, who's an Indigenous architect, with Wanda Della Costa, I believe, Indigenous architect, and Smoke Architecture, another Indigenous architect. I want to bring your attention to Michelangelo, wonderful artist, sculptor, architect. And I want to remind you all of the Pieta, the beautiful image of Mary holding Christ in her arms, the sorrow of Mary. Michelangelo also designed, he was the chief architect for the Vatican. St. Peter's Basilica, and the Campidoglio, beautiful space in Rome, the Piazza di Campidoglio, which is, I believe, located on a sacred space, so a Etruscan sacred space. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about Love Park, which is a beautiful park by Claude Cormier. He's a landscape architect who passed away in 2023 from cancer, Catholic from Quebec. Deeply beautiful, and Matthew, yes.
Has a view of that park.
He has a view of this park. It's in the shape of a heart. In the place of the piercing of the sword, there's a beautiful tree. And through this sort of pain and sorrow comes something incredibly, a spacious, wonderful place for the public to enjoy, live, experience. So public spaces are very important. The Pope, in this case, the client was a municipality. Miles, you mentioned at the beginning the Pritzker Prize. So children drew something different from what the profession gives us. We only exist and we can only do our work. We are artists and we need good clients. We are like violins and we can't play beautiful music without good clients. So we're looking to municipalities who takes the role of the church in these modern times. Anyway, that's my spiel. Thank you.
Those are wonderful perspectives. So rather than my asking anything, there's bound to be questions or thoughts from the floor, and we have sort of just about the right amount of time for a quick one. Yeah, please.
So I'm curious, do you feel that guilds, whatever type of association, should have a Catholic name? And if yes, then do you think there should be a parallel one that is Jewish and one that is Muslim or Hindu or whatever? Or is there any other way to look at it? Can there be a common ground?
Of course. We have a Thomas More Lawyers Guild, though they exist in other jurisdictions. There's a Toronto Jewish Lawyers Organization. There's a Muslim Lawyers Organization. There's all sorts. And then we have broader categories. Christian Legal Fellowship, which engages not merely Catholics, but also part of the Protestant community. And then you have any other categories that may be oriented towards a particular area of law, in the same way that there are Southeast Asian Lawyers Associations and Black Lawyers Associations and so on. So I'm not, I think that's part of a pluralist society that we actually engage in an opportunity for that. And the interesting thing, just to say, good and the bad. So the Thomas More Lawyers Association, or Thomas More Lawyers Guild, which has its origins in Toronto in 1925, has originally been involved because Toronto was a very orange city, right? So being a Catholic lawyer in Toronto was a minority position. You weren't being advanced or given opportunities, for example, for judicial appointments and so on. Now that's changed over time, and it's changed even more now in the diversity category. Not so much diversity of opinion, it's diversity of your immutable characteristics is how they're measuring diversity in my view. But that said, the Thomas More Lawyers Guild is a bunch of Catholic lawyers typically, but we're not of one voice, we're not of one thought, we're not of one orientation and or even lobbying engagement. So that's why I moved into the area of the Catholic Civil Rights League, because there were so many challenges to conscience rights, to Catholic education rights, to the definition of marriage in the 1990s, to all sorts of things over the years. The Thomas More Lawyers Guild, despite our namesake, who is the patron saint not merely of lawyers, but of politicians and judges, interesting, and others. Anyway, the point I'm making is the Guild had difficulty necessarily taking on positions. The ostensible reason was that we'd either have judges in our membership or former judges in our membership, and that therefore they could be accused of being biased and therefore subject to recusal. So a lot of that work that moved into our lobbying work shifted over to the organization that I manage, which is the Catholic Civil Rights League. The advantage of that, so it's a disadvantage, the guilds don't really speak in a vigorous way, whereas my organization can, because I got Catholic in my title and I got approval from the bishops to do it and so on. And so as a result, we've been engaged in, I'm repeating myself in the previous session, I think we've done over 30 interventions at the Supreme Court of Canada, another 25 at different appellate courts across Canada. And the point is that that's an opportunity to intervene, to bring a Catholic position on a matter of public debate. So to answer your question, I think others are being served. This is the way we're doing our gig. And I'll give you an example. We've had the charter since '82. We've had decisions coming down from the Supreme Court since roughly '85, '86. One of the first of those decisions was Morgenthaler in '88, which struck down the abortion provisions of our criminal code. Anybody want to guess how many interveners were in that case? Zero. I just argued on behalf of the Canadian bishops the Bill 21 appeal, the Supreme Court in March. There were over 50 interveners, over 150 lawyers involved in that case. And that's sort of the growth of where interventions have gone. And I had recognized, because I got called to the bar in 1988, that in effect, there was a need, that the feminists were appearing, certain other groups were appearing, but there was really no Catholic voice. So I went to the Guild and they, well, we can't take this, we're not allowed, So I got hooked up with Tom Langan and Jeanine Langan, and through them, the Catholic Civil Rights League. I organized our first set of interventions, and we've been doing them ever since about 1995 forward. And the point I'm making is we now have a track record. We have I think a good reputation for bringing good views, vigorous argument, moderate. We're not out there preaching, the Ten Commandments or something. The point is we actually are saying something about conscience rights for medical professionals, conscience rights for teachers, conscience rights in all sorts of different categories, which extend beyond Catholic.
Right, but that was my question. Is do you need to have the title Catholic in something like that? Because really what you are defending is a very basic human dignity standpoint. So that was my question, is like, do you really need to have that identity name? And would you be able to do even broader, more deeper work if you instead focus on the identity being the defense of human dignity? Just curious.
Well, let me just jump in first. I don't think I'm embarrassed to be working on behalf of an entity that has Catholic identity to defend human dignity. And we typically are recognized for that. But I'll make it simpler for you. We are always being parceled in our silos, including courts. And so, here come the Catholics. Okay, we may be diminished if that's your concern, but I don't think it's because of the argument, it's because of maybe who we represent. And let me just finally say that we are careful not to sort of engage in here's what the catechism has to say and how we can help you with this. Even in the Bill 21 case, we argued subsidiarity. We actually argued Catholic social teaching is part of the way in which the Supreme Court can be guided in terms of dealing with whether in fact Quebec was acting beyond its jurisdiction, ultra vires, with its current mandate to impose laicite secularism in that province. So it's sometimes helpful to say, hey, we're a Catholic group and we've been around for, 2,000 years. Maybe we have something to offer here that may be of assistance, which isn't the case, say, of a lot of Protestant groups, which are very disparate, less history, less of an academic tradition in many requests and these situations. And it's interesting because subsidiarity has been recognized in our federal constitutional law. So we get to then leapfrog that into the next set of cases, right? Interesting. Sorry, I'm interrupting.
Yeah, that's okay.
With your other perspective, yeah, you're saying.
I was just gonna say, like, I think to understanding the difference between like the regulatory bodies and the guilds as well, right? So the doctors are being told by their regulatory bodies that they have to have this effective referral process. The guild is a place where doctors who want to still live out the Catholic teachings and provide good health care can come together with other like-minded doctors and know that it's a safe space. And I don't like using that word, safe space, but effectively, where they can have those conversations of this is happening in my practice. This is, I've had a patient come in with this concern and how do I navigate it? And then for the broader piece of how do we then stick up for the Catholic teachings and engaging in other, agencies and groups. And so to have Catholic in the name allows them to know that they're with like-minded people. And I do think other people who even are not Catholic, but may have a disagreement with abortion or end-of-life issues or artificial reproductive technologies, know that that is a place that they can go to have those conversations. Whereas if Catholic wasn't in the name, I don't think they would know that. And I have no problem, and I don't think any of the doctors that I know would have a problem if I don't know, maybe there is a Jewish Doctors Association, but the Catholic doctors need to have a place where they can have these conversations, where they know that they are not going to have somebody coming in and basically telling on them to the regulatory body.
Yeah, please, your thoughts on Catholic brand and.
Catholic brand. Okay, so I wanted to talk about Catholic brand principles. I'm a Catholic and an architect. I know when I entered my first day at the University of Waterloo, I sat beside my friend. 1,000 kids applied, 60 got into the first year, and I'm sitting beside my Catholic high school friends from Notre Dame. So I'm sure there's lots of us that are architects, but as far as I know, there aren't a Catholic Architects Guild. Our regulatory body, the Ontario Association of Architects, combines some guild-type aspects within it, I guess. So we regulate the practices of architecture, but there's also a secondary object, regulate the practice to protect the public good, advance the public good, the public interest. And the secondary object is to raise awareness around the public appreciation of architecture and the allied arts. And in order to be accepted as someone who gets licensed at the Ontario Association of Architects, one of the characteristics one must have is to be a person of good character, I guess. So a person of good character, I think, could be applied to people of many different faiths, right? So that's what I want to share. And I'm here sort of this in my role as a counselor, being here with you, sort of promoting the public appreciation of architecture and the allied arts.
I think there's a circle centered in New York, although some of them live of Catholic artists, and some of them are architects, and they lean very slightly towards ecclesiastical architecture, but not exclusively. So, I mean, it's maybe looser.
There is in Finland, when I was in Finland in 1995, there were incredible modern and older churches. And many Finnish architects got their start and started practices because they were given commissions of churches. And in Finland, there was a tithe, so mandatory 10% of one's earnings were given to the church, and the church had funding to hire incredible architects. So some really beautiful buildings there.
But I'd like to turn to your question, because you're sort of saying, well, we're just focusing on the Catholic issues. So let's focus on diversity for a second. So in our law society, it mandated this statement of principles regime, the promotion of diversity. And so there's a particular organization called Leading Lawyers for Diversity. It was really a collection of in-house counsel, not so much the private bar, but the in-house counsel bar, people working for corporations. And it was the idea to promote diversity of races, of other perspectives, within that area. And it had every major Canadian corporation logo on its site, 350 to 400 publicly traded or other major corporations in Canada, which would have an in-house legal department. You're kind of mandated to join, just peer pressure. So a colleague of mine, who was then managing partner at Bennett Jones, one of the biggest firms in Canada, good guy, Hugh McKinnon, I don't mind saying his name. So he gets a presentation. He says, well, and he's dealing with a guy who's Jewish, who was talking about the Leading Lawyers for Diversity. And he said, well, is it the goal then of the organization that the representation of your firms or of the law society or of the legal profession generally should have some relative bearing with the prorated religious affiliations of Ontarians or Canadians? And he said, well, yeah, that would be a goal of ours. And he says, well, tell me, how do I then tell the 26 of 35 Jewish lawyers in my firm that they're going to have to go? And it's not hard to understand. There's a great preponderance of Jews in medicine, in law, potentially in architecture. Why? Because it's education is so important in that community, right? But the notion of some of these diversity, I call them zealots, are sometimes not actually seeing the anti-Semitism of their own position. So I, as a Catholic, wouldn't argue in a way offending my Catholic sensibilities. No, you're about meritocracy, about advancement, about opportunity. I'm saying there's a side unintended consequence of some of what you're asking, which is quite frankly anti-Semitic. And I stand with my Jewish brothers and sisters to say that I have some concerns about that, and why don't you? And he was talking to a guy named Simon Green, who was, a Jewish guy, although probably not as aware. And the guy didn't have a good answer, nor did the Southeast Asian lawyers, who would be presented with similar kinds of arguments, and we need more representation within that community, at the expense of whom? It's almost not a zero-sum game in every case, but the notion is, let's understand what the impact of moving away from meritocracy and equal opportunity can have on forcing that kind of diversity.
I don't think they have early one.
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't mean to, but I think it might be nice to be caught in one when there's a quick question.
I've been intrigued with this DEI for a long time. I think we all have, in terms of where it's coming from and where it takes us or doesn't take us. And of course, Catholic moral and social teaching has a better, representation. I heard the discussion, instead of DEI, it would be human dignity, solidarity seeking communion, and service seeking justice. Well, let's just call it human dignity communion, though that's a very religious term, and service. And I guess whatever one would come up with that legitimately represents Catholic moral and social teaching. Why could not a guild or an association might be more difficult, say on the basis of their religious perspective or their common religious perspective. It could even go wider than Catholics. Take on the spirit of what maybe DEI is trying to get at, and do it better through its faith tradition, and that would be a basis to I guess to respond as a guild. Is that at all possible?
You guys work on it.
The pushback from others would say, well, who are you Catholics to tell us? Who are you religionists to tell us?
But you're not telling them, but you are living out of the integrity.
I like to suggest that we don't impose, we propose.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
But the notion is, I have done that in some of my arguments. I use that one, it's just an example, a colleague of mine made it. But when I gave my speech in favor of repealing the Statement of Principles mandate of the Law Society on the floor of convocation, we had just gone through an election where folks like us were perceived as troglodytes, oppressors, part of the patriarchy, all the language that's used to effectively criticize opponents to the DEI engagement. And I said, well, isn't that interesting? Because DEI is supposed to advance the opportunity, the human dignity of advancing others to positions that we are allegedly maintaining for ourselves. I said, look at the outcomes. We're being called names. We're being called, something which is in no way reflective of who I am as a human being or the work that I do or the positions I take. If that's the outcome, maybe there should be some analysis made of what we've wrought. Why is that what we're hearing from opponents who may have a different, opponents who have a different view than we do about the importance of opportunity, of meritocracy, of ability to engage in the work of their own choice. So I agree with you that we can continue to make those points, and that's why I mentioned the subsidiarity piece in the Bill 21 appeal, right?
Yeah.
Imagine a Catholic lawyer's, well, I was acting for the bishops, but I'm a Catholic lawyer, they kind of know where I come from. I've been there 25 times. So the notion is, I'm there talking about subsidiarity at the Supreme Court of Canada. The Jewish tradition doesn't have that same, because it's in various streams within that, but we have our faith tradition. And since Rerum Novarum in 1891, we've adopted, the notion of how subsidiarity can provide a model for dealing with jurisdiction issues around the world, let alone how we deal with it within a federation in Canada. So I'm not afraid of that. I'm not a theologian. I'm a lawyer, so I've got to make sure I frame it, couch it, and advance it in a particular way that I can justify within my precedent systems of the common law.
As a theologian, the tension I deal with, probably we all do, is inclusivity is a legitimate term, but let's push out all that it means, and of course it's informed by our faith tradition, and so on the one hand, there's those that inclusivity all the way. Okay, well, let's make sure we're clear about what that means. On the other hand, we don't use it at all. It's a bad word, and well, we're dealing with it. So let's speak to the culture as people who are dedicated to making disciples and evangelization. And how does that reflect itself in those who got to work in the world? And anyway, I think it's an ongoing discussion.
Yeah, and I'll bring it to my personal thing. When I make an argument, I'm also mindful of my obligation to reach out to the world and baptize them and evangelize too. I don't want to come across as a creep or a bully or an oppressor. I'm proposing. I'm proposing how, in the case of Bill 21 or the anti-religious vibe going on in the province of Quebec currently, how that leads to greater division when we're all about unity. But more to the point, I'd like to be able to think I'm doing it in a way that is attractive so that people see that, well, I need to find out more about what that guy, what makes him tick, right?
3 quick proposals towards the common good. With a couple of minutes that remain before the next plenary session, one, those who might need a coffee or water have a couple minutes to do it. Those who want to discuss global Vatican-based credentialing for any of the guilds can hang back with our panelists, I think. And by hopefully by universal acclaim, could all of you give a quick expression of appreciation for our 3 outstanding